My mother forged divorce documents while I was in surgery and tried to get custody of my children, claiming I was mentally unstable. I discovered everything when I was served 3 months later. The process server knocked on my door on a stifling, suffocating Thursday afternoon in November, precisely at 3:20. 7 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because I was obsessively looking at the kitchen wall clock, counting the minutes until I could pick up the children from school, mentally planning the dinner I would prepare with love and dedication, as I had done every night since Raphael had left, taking with him only his expensive clothes and his wounded ego, carrying documents that would transform my life into a devastating legal battle that I never, in my worst nightmares filled with maternal anxiety and visceral fears about the future, imagined having to face against my own mother, the woman who was supposedly my safe harbor, my unbreakable fortress, my unconditional defender in this cruel and relentless world, while my 2 small and innocent children played carelessly in the living room with their favorite toys. Gabriel meticulously building an entire city with colored blocks that represented his ideal world where families never separated and grandmothers were always kind. Sophia making her dolls talk in whispers about secrets that only she understood, both completely oblivious to the tsunami of family destruction that was about to swallow our small house that I struggled so hard to maintain as a sanctuary of love and stability after the traumatic divorce. The sound of that dry, authoritarian, and impersonal knock, 3 firm blows that seemed to hammer nails into a coffin, still violently echoes in my darkest and most torturous nightmares, those from which I wake up in a cold sweat with my heart racing, marking with surgical and cruel precision the exact moment I discovered, with absolute horror that made my blood freeze in my veins and my stomach twist like an agonizing serpent, that the person who should protect me unconditionally, who carried me in her womb for 9 months feeling my every movement, who breastfed me in her arms swearing eternal love and infinite protection, who promised during my first baby tears that she would never allow the world to hurt me, had become my greatest existential threat, a predator disguised as a protector, using criminally falsified documents with the precision of a professional assassin to try to control my life and legally kidnap my children through Machiavellian and cruel legal manipulations that almost cost me everything I loved and valued most in the entire world. The 2 small lives that gave meaning to my existence and strength to continue breathing even on the darkest days. When I opened the heavy solid wood door, that door I had painted hope blue the first weekend after Raphael left, desperately trying to create new beginnings and erase memories of screams and accusations, and saw that tall, imposing man in an impeccably pressed navy blue official uniform, his face a professional mask of trained indifference, holding a voluminous, worn brown leather folder weathered by time and the weight of others' tragedies, filled with stamped papers, sealed with official seals that seemed to carry the weight of a death sentence announced on letterhead. My heart immediately accelerated uncontrollably like a caged bird beating its wings against the bars, pumping pure adrenaline and cortisol in toxic doses through every vein in my body that began to shake involuntarily, while a cold and terrifying premonition, that primitive maternal intuition that warns us of dangers even before our conscious mind processes them, that something absolutely terrible and irreversible was about to happen, took hold of every fiber of my being, like poisonous ivy intertwining in my soul. But absolutely nothing. Not even my worst night fears when I woke up at 3 in the morning, imagining Raphael trying to take the children from me, nor the anxieties that consumed me during divorce mediations when he threatened to use my emotional instability against me, could have adequately prepared me for the apocalyptic and complete emotional devastation of discovering that my own mother, Regina Santos, the woman who lovingly chose my name, who bought my school uniforms, who combed my hair on Sunday mornings, had criminally forged my signature on official divorce documents I had never seen, touched, or even imagined in my most paranoid nightmares existed in this plane of reality, deliberately creating with calculated premeditation a chaotic and potentially irreversible legal situation that would place in imminent and devastating risk the custody of my beloved 7- and 5-year-old children, Gabriel and Sophia, the 2 most precious and sacred people of my existence, the 2 hearts that beat outside my chest, and for whom I would be capable of killing or dying without hesitation. The physical sensation of nausea that invaded me at that moment was so intense and overwhelming that the world began to spin in slow motion, the colors losing saturation like in an old photograph faded by time, the sounds becoming muffled and distant as if I were submerged in deep, dark waters, needing to support myself on the doorframe with both hands to avoid fainting right there in front of that involuntary messenger of destruction. my legs turning into trembling jelly, unable to support the weight of such a monstrous truth. While the officer maintained his professionally neutral and distant expression, that mask that judicial system professionals learn to wear to protect themselves from the ocean of human pain they witness daily. Clearly accustomed to delivering family tragedies packaged in official envelopes as if delivering pizzas, without allowing himself to absorb the devastating impact that his words and documents cause in the lives they touch only in passing. I could hear, as if through a very long and dark tunnel, the innocent laughter of my children in the living room, completely oblivious to the fact that our family was being attacked from within, betrayed by the blood of our own blood. And this dissonance between their pure joy and my absolute terror created a macabre symphony that made my heart shatter into 1,000 irregular and sharp pieces. The officer handed me the heavy papers with that characteristic and dehumanized professional coldness of someone who delivers tragedies and family destructions daily as part of their monotonous bureaucratic routine. He would probably return home that night and have dinner normally with his family without thinking twice about the bomb he had just detonated in my life, informing me with a monotonous voice devoid of any human emotion or compassion, as if reading a shopping list or an instruction manual, that I was being formally summoned to appear in family court next week, specifically on Tuesday at 9 o'clock sharp in the morning, due to extremely serious and potentially criminal irregularities found in my divorce proceedings, irregularities involving criminal falsification of federal public documents, use of false documents with intent to harm third parties, possible conspiracy to commit procedural fraud, and mainly, and here his voice finally showed a trace of humanity, perhaps pity, possible severe and proven parental negligence that could result in the immediate, summary, and definitive loss of custody of my beloved children to the state or to third parties considered more fit. My hands trembled violently like dry leaves in the wind of an autumn storm, my fingers barely able to hold those cursed documents that weighed like concrete blocks, each page seeming to weigh a ton of molten lead, barely managing to focus my vision, which became blurred by the tears that began to form without my permission. Tears of anger, of fear, of disbelief, of a pain so deep that there were no words in any human language to adequately describe it. But the little I managed to decipher through the fog of panic that enveloped my mind like a toxic mist made me feel as if the solid ground had literally disappeared beneath my feet, leaving me in free fall into an endless abyss where there was no gravity, only the pure, icy terror of ultimate betrayal. There it was, printed on official paper with letterheads and seals that seemed to laugh at my misfortune, a divorce petition supposedly signed by me, but the signature was a grotesque parody, a childish and poorly made imitation that any minimally attentive person would realize was fake, agreeing to absolutely absurd, inconceivable terms contrary to everything I had fought for during the real divorce, voluntarily and irrevocably giving up all parental rights as if my children were disposable objects, completely renouncing any alimony as if I were a millionaire and not a teacher who counted coins at the end of the month, transferring ownership of the house that I paid for with blood and sweat to Raphael without any compensation. And mainly, the most devastating, cruel, and incomprehensible of all, explicitly agreeing in writing that my mother, Regina, would be the permanent and exclusive legal guardian of my children due to my supposed clinically diagnosed chronic emotional instability, proven history of severe maternal negligence, and absolute inability to provide a safe and healthy environment for minors under my responsibility. The grotesquely falsified signature on the document was a pathetic imitation, almost childish and poorly executed of my natural handwriting, as if someone had tried to copy my writing by looking only superficially, without understanding the soul behind each stroke, clearly forged by someone who superficially knew my characteristic traits, but couldn't perfectly replicate the unique and personal pressure of my pen that became lighter at the end of words, the organic and musical rhythm of my writing that danced between cursive and print, or the small personal and idiosyncratic flourishes that made my signature unique and inimitable like a fingerprint, and the damned and revealing date corresponded precisely, with a criminal precision that revealed premeditation and patient waiting for the perfect moment to attack, to the period when I was hospitalized at the San Francisco Municipal Medical Center, lying on a cold and impersonal stretcher, painfully recovering from an emergency appendicitis surgery that almost evolved into peritonitis and could have killed me if I had waited a few more hours to seek help. Completely sedated with morphine and other potent painkillers that made me float between consciousness and unconsciousness, physically and mentally unable to sign any legal document, to make any conscious decision, or even to remember my own name at times. The devastating and nauseating realization that my own mother had patiently waited, like a calculating and cruel predator observing her wounded prey. For the moment of my greatest physical and emotional vulnerability, when I was literally fighting to survive on an operating table, to execute her meticulously architected criminal plan, hit me like a runaway high-speed train, making my stomach violently turn, bile rising up my throat with the taste of betrayal and poison as I struggled not to vomit right there at the entrance of my house. In front of the officer who was already beginning to walk away, his mission of destruction efficiently completed with bureaucratic efficiency. My 37 years of life, which had been marked by numerous personal challenges that forced me to develop a resilience I didn't know I possessed, painful overcomings that taught me I was stronger than I thought, and growth through adversities that shaped me as fire shapes steel. Absolutely nothing. Not even my ex-husband's serial betrayals that I discovered through messages on his phone that he forgot to lock, the public humiliations when his lovers confronted me in restaurants, the sleepless nights crying in the bathroom so the children wouldn't hear, or the extreme financial difficulties after the divorce when I had to choose between buying food or paying the electricity bill, adequately prepared me for the apocalyptically devastating and surreal moment of realizing with crystal clear and painful clarity that my own mother, the woman who gave me life through pain and blood, who was supposedly meant to love me unconditionally as promised by all books about motherhood, had deliberately and consciously taken advantage of my moment of extreme physical vulnerability, when I was literally open on an operating table with my entrails exposed, to try to steal my children through premeditated and cruel documentary fraud. Throughout my turbulent childhood in Middle Tamsiwaites, class suburbs where appearances mattered more than happiness, and troubled adolescence marked by desperate attempts to gain approval that never came, Regina had been an excessively controlling mother who chose my clothes until I was 15, an emotional manipulator who cried theatrically whenever I dared to disagree, and psychologically abusive with her constant comparisons to better daughters of her friends, but who never, not even when she told me at 16 that I was a disappointment for not getting into medical school as she had always dreamed, completely accepted or minimally respected my hard-won independence in adult life, always trying to obsessively interfere in my decisions through elaborate emotional blackmail involving her supposedly fragile health, constant psychological pressure disguised as maternal advice, and subtle but devastating manipulations that made me question my own sanity. But I never, not even in my most paranoid moments at 3 in the morning when insomnia made me imagine catastrophic scenarios, imagined she would be capable of crossing the definitive criminal line, of transforming emotional manipulation into federal crime, to try to take total and absolute control of my innocent children, who represented everything good and pure that I had managed to create in this world. The visceral sensation of betrayal was so deep that it seemed to pierce my soul, so fundamentally destructive of my basic understanding of maternal love that it shook the foundations of everything I believed to be true about family, so completely annihilating of my ability to trust that it made me violently vomit right there in the hallway bathroom. That small bathroom I had decorated with children's drawings to make it cheerful. My body physically rejecting with primitive violence the incomprehensible and unacceptable reality that the woman who carried me in her womb for 9 months feeling every hiccup of mine, who breastfed me through endless nights when I was just a defenseless piece of life, who supposedly loved me with that mythical and unbreakable love of mothers, was deliberately trying to destroy my own motherhood through serious federal crimes that could permanently and irreversibly separate me from my small and vulnerable children. Gabriel with his eyes that reflected all the innocence in the world, Sophia with her smile that illuminated the darkest days, who were literally my only genuine reason to continue breathing, to get up every morning, to fight against the depression that tried to swallow me after the traumatic divorce. The bitter and metallic taste of bile burning my throat was less repugnant than the oxidized copper taste of maternal betrayal that seemed to permeate every cell of my body like a slow-acting poison, retroactively poisoning memories that were once precious. First days of school, family Christmases, hugs that now seemed like traps, and transforming them into retrospective evidence of a masked sociopathy that I had refused to recognize through decades of desperate denial. I immediately called with trembling and sweaty fingers that could barely find the correct numbers on the phone. I had to try 3 times before I could dial correctly. My trusted lawyer, Dr. Miranda, an extremely experienced 55-year-old professional with gray hair that inspired confidence like a beacon in the storm, who had competently represented me during the extremely difficult and emotionally devastating initial divorce negotiations with Raphael, my narcissistic ex. husband with whom I had been unfortunately married for 12 long and torturous years, years that seemed like decades of constant psychological warfare, before finally finding courage, through intensive therapy and support from a few true friends, to discover and confront his multiple sexual and emotional betrayals that included affairs with at least 3 different women I knew personally, which made our coexistence absolutely unsustainable and toxic, not only for me, but mainly for the children who were beginning to normalize shouting and hostility as standard communication. Dr. Miranda had always been known in respectable legal circles for his unshakable professional calm, even in the most chaotic situations where other lawyers would lose their composure. His supernatural ability to maintain composure in emotionally charged cases that destroyed entire families. His skill at finding solutions where others saw only insurmountable problems. But when I explained the desperate situation over the phone with a voice choked by barely contained sobs that made me stutter and lose my breath, the words coming out jumbled and confused as I tried to explain the impossible, I could hear genuine concern and even a rare trace of moral indignation in his normally controlled and professionally modulated voice, as he urgently instructed me with paternal authority to immediately gather all original divorce documents I had stored anywhere, especially those with my true signature for graphotechnical comparison, hospitalization records with specific dates and times, and most importantly, his voice became even more serious here, to sign absolutely nothing, not even seemingly harmless delivery receipts, without his physical presence and explicit approval, as any document could be used against me in this moment of extreme vulnerability. Beatrice, take a deep breath and listen to me very carefully, because what I'm going to say now is crucial for your family's future, he said with palpable urgency that made me instantly understand that the situation was even more serious than my panicking mind could process. His voice taking on the tone he probably used in courtrooms when he needed to convince skeptical juries. Falsification of judicial documents is an extremely serious federal crime under Article 297 of the Penal Code, punishable by up to 6 years of imprisonment in an initially closed regime, especially when it involves custody of vulnerable minors and attempted qualified procedural fraud with the intent to harm third parties. And we need to act immediately. Not tomorrow, not in a few hours, but right now, without losing a single second, to protect your fundamental parental rights, constitutionally guaranteed, before this criminal fraud causes potentially irreversible damage to your family and permanently traumatizes your children. His words, pronounced with the incontestable authority of decades of experience in family law and the urgency of someone who recognizes imminent danger, simultaneously calmed me by confirming that I had competent professional support from someone who understood the gravity of the situation, and terrified me by confirming that the situation was even more legally complex and dangerous than I had initially understood in my state of shock. The distressing car journey to Dr. Miranda's law office that infernally hot afternoon, the car thermometer showed 38 degrees, but I felt glacial cold inside, was one of the most psychologically torturous experiences of my entire life, each second stretching like endless hours of mental torture. Driving mechanically through the heavy and chaotic late afternoon São Paulo traffic, while my feverish mind desperately tried to process and comprehend how my own mother, blood of my blood, flesh of my flesh, the person who should protect me against the world, had reached the abysmal and unthinkable point of committing serious federal crimes with prison sentences to try to legally kidnap my children through an elaborate scheme that must have taken months of planning. Each endless red light was an eternity of torturous and obsessive thoughts that circled in vicious cycles about the psychologically sick and morally corrupted motivations that could have led Regina to delusionally believe she had the divine or moral right to falsify official legal documents and methodically destroy my family life, cruelly transforming me from a dedicated and loving mother who sacrificed everything for her children into an alleged negligent and incompetent one through elaborately documented lies officially filed in the judicial system that now viewed me as a potential criminal. The last 2 years since my painful and traumatic divorce had been devoted entirely and obsessively to rebuilding my shattered emotional life, brick by brick, day after day, and providing psychological stability for my children, traumatized by the abrupt separation of their parents. Working exhaustively as a university professor of developmental psychology during the day, at 2 different universities, to manage to pay the bills, preparing classes until the early hours of the morning, correcting endless papers on weekends, and caring for them with all the love and dedication humanly possible during the nights and weekends, meticulously creating a safe, loving, and structured family environment, despite the painful absence of their father, who rarely fulfilled his court, ordered bi-weekly visits, always with elaborate excuses about unmissable meetings, sudden business trips, or commitments that mysteriously arose on the scheduled dates, and every moment of that careful and painful reconstruction. Every small victory, like Gabriel's first genuine smile after months of sadness, or Sophia finally stopping asking when Daddy would come home, was now threatened with total annihilation by the incomprehensible and unforgivable betrayal of my own mother. When I finally arrived at the luxurious law office, breathless and sweaty, located in a 20-story mirrored commercial building reflecting the stormy late afternoon sky in the city's business center, after 40 minutes in traffic that felt like 40 years of agony, Dr. Miranda had already begun meticulously investigating the fraudulent documents through his strategic contacts cultivated over decades in the court and registry office, people who trusted him and understood the urgency of cases involving children at risk, discovering disturbing and revealing details that made the situation even more criminally serious and legally complex than it appeared on the surface. Beatrice, sit down and prepare yourself psychologically for what I'm about to tell you, because it's even worse than we imagined, he said gravely after offering me a glass of water that my trembling hands could barely hold, his brown eyes showing a disturbing mixture of professional indignation and genuine human compassion that made me realize the news would be devastating. I discovered through absolutely reliable sources at the registry office that these criminally falsified documents were filed exactly 3 months ago, meaning she waited all this time for the process to proceed before you discovered it, precisely during the period of your emergency surgery when you were completely vulnerable. And curiously, perhaps not so curiously considering the level of premeditation involved, your mother, Regina, appears as the main eyewitness, categorically stating under oath, putting her own freedom at risk if perjury is proven, that you voluntarily and consciously signed all documents in her presence, and that of a second witness whom curiously no one at the registry office can identify or locate. He carefully showed me, like someone handling evidence of a heinous crime, authenticated copies of the fraudulent documents that contain not only my grotesquely falsified signature on multiple pages, each worse than the previous one, as if the forger was losing patience with the charade itself, but also completely fabricated and defamatory statements about my supposedly severely deteriorated mental state that included allegations that I had been diagnosed with severe borderline personality disorder, that I took heavy psychiatric medications that incapacitated me, that I had attempted suicide multiple times in front of the children, absurd allegations of severe maternal neglect, including leaving the children without food for days, allowing them to stay in unsanitary environments with feces and urine, and delusional accusations of chronic inability to properly care for my innocent children, who were described in the document as constant victims of emotional abuse and physical neglect by the mother who is biologically unfit for the exercise of motherhood. The shocking and nauseating discovery that Regina had meticulously planned this criminal scheme for months, possibly years. There were indications that she had been collecting information and documents long before my surgery, patiently waiting like a poisonous spider weaving its deadly web for a moment of extreme vulnerability to execute her Machiavellian plan with surgical precision, made me feel physically sick to the point of needing to run to the office bathroom, with my stomach violently churning while waves of nausea invaded me with the abysmal and incomprehensible depth of the maternal betrayal that was being revealed, document by document, lie by lie, crime by crime. The forged document was a sinister and sick masterpiece of elaborate legal manipulation that revealed detailed technical knowledge of complex legal procedures and obscure procedural loopholes that Regina certainly did not possess alone. She barely understood simple contracts, always asking me to explain basic documents, strongly and disturbingly suggesting that she had received specialized guidance from someone with professional experience in document fraud and manipulation of the judicial system, possibly through payment or some kind of shady agreement. Each cursed page contained meticulously constructed accusations strategically positioned for maximum legal impact about my supposed chronic parental negligence, including completely false and defamatory allegations, with a wealth of fabricated details claiming that I routinely left the children alone and helpless for long periods without supervision while I went out for promiscuous encounters, that I didn't provide adequate nutritious food, allowing them to go hungry while I spent money on superfluities, that I deliberately allowed them to stay in dangerous and unhealthy environments with subhuman conditions, and most importantly, The most devastating, cruel accusation calculated to destroy any chance of defense? That my chronically unstable and deteriorated mental state, aggravated by substance abuse and erratic behavior, posed a direct and imminent risk to the physical, emotional, and psychological well-being of the defenseless minors who deserved a stable home with the dedicated grandmother who always made up for the maternal deficiencies of the birth mother. The lies were so absurdly detailed, so specific in their false allegations with dates, times, and supposed witnesses, so strategically crafted to appear plausible and credible, that they had clearly been meticulously constructed over a long time by someone who intimately knew our daily family routine. Each schedule, each activity, every detail that could be distorted, using true information about our school hours, extracurricular activities, and medical appointments, but perversely distorting them with manipulative mastery to create a false but superficially convincing narrative that could easily deceive overworked and exhausted judicial authorities who didn't deeply know the true situation and who tended to believe apparently well-founded official documents. Each lie was like a calculated stab to maximize legal and emotional damage, demonstrating a level of premeditated cruelty and refined sadism that I never, in my worst nightmares about family betrayal, imagined my own mother would be capable of conceiving in her mind, let alone methodically executing with such coldness and determination. We need to act immediately and aggressively to nullify these criminally fraudulent documents before they cause irreversible procedural damage, and more importantly, we need to protect you from potentially devastating criminal consequences if the court initially believes, as sometimes happens in heated family disputes, that you're trying to deny a legitimate signature due to subsequent regret or trying to manipulate the system, warned Dr. Miranda with growing urgency, his voice assuming the commanding tone he used in critical situations. Explaining didactically but with palpable haste that in complex custody dispute cases involving serious accusations, malicious false allegations could quickly transform into Kafkaesque judicial nightmares that destroyed innocent families and permanently separated loving parents from their children, sometimes irreversibly even after the truth was discovered, as the trauma caused to the children by the process could be permanent. He immediately began feverishly preparing, with the intensity of someone who understands that every minute counts, an extremely detailed and well-founded emergency petition requesting the immediate annulment of the falsified documents based on incontestable evidence, including official and irrefutable medical reports from the hospital that categorically proved my hospitalization during the exact period of the supposed signature, detailed hospital records showing precisely the times of medications administered, that I was under deep general anesthesia and physically unable to sign any document, or even hold a pen, nursing records documenting my state of consciousness hour by hour, and most importantly, requesting a complete and thorough federal criminal investigation into the forgery that had clearly been committed with specific malice and malicious intent to irreparably harm my fundamental constitutionally guaranteed parental rights and destroy my family through criminal means. The most heart-wrenching and emotionally devastating part of that entire Kafkaesque and surreal situation was having to gently explain to my innocent and confused children, without further traumatizing them, without destroying the image they had of their grandmother, without planting seeds of hatred that could poison them for the rest of their lives, why Grandma Regina, whom they unconditionally loved with that pure and unconditional love of children, whom they considered a central and important figure in their lives from the beginning, whom they associated with happy moments and special gifts, could no longer visit them temporarily, while the extremely complex legal situation was being investigated and resolved by adults. Gabriel, my sensitive 7-year-old son with brown eyes identical to mine that reflected each emotion with amplified intensity, who had inherited my tendency to feel too much and overthink everything, was especially close and emotionally attached to his grandmother who had always excessively spoiled him as a way to undermine my authority, and couldn't comprehend with his innocent, childlike mind why suddenly she was inexplicably forbidden from picking him up from school on Wednesdays, as she had religiously done for years. It was their sacred ritual to stop at the ice cream shop and let him choose as many flavors as he wanted, or taking him to the park on Saturdays to feed the ducks at the lake while they talked about everything and nothing, constantly asking me with his confused little eyes brimming with tears that broke my already shattered heart if he had done something terribly wrong to make Grandma so angry with him to the point of completely disappearing without even saying goodbye. Sophia, my 5-year-old princess with golden curls that danced when she ran. With a strong and determined personality she certainly hadn't inherited from me, although more emotionally resilient due to her naturally independent and adaptable personality, also showed worrying and painful signs of acute stress from the abrupt and unexplained change in the family routine established for years. Frequently waking up during the night screaming from terrible nightmares where people disappeared without explanation, asking to sleep clutching onto me in my bed as she hadn't done since she was 3. Desperately seeking physical security through constant contact to compensate for the emotional instability caused by the sudden and unexplained removal of her grandmother, who had always been a constant, comforting, and predictable presence in her young life. 3 endless days after the devastating discovery of the criminally falsified documents, 3 days of complete insomnia, of obsessively watching my children sleep afraid they would be taken from me at any moment, of jumping at every noise thinking it was the police coming to take them. Raphael, my narcissistic and emotionally absent ex-husband who had turned our home into a psychological battlefield for years, unexpectedly appeared without warning at my door on a Sunday morning when I was still in pajamas trying to pretend normalcy while preparing pancakes for the children, demanding immediate and harsh explanations about what he dismissively called ridiculous judicial mess created by your dysfunctional family that was unnecessarily complicating our already precarious visitation agreements frequently unfulfilled by him. His imposing presence there, after consecutive months of olympically ignoring his basic parental responsibilities, failing to pay child support, claiming financial difficulties while posting photos of expensive trips on social media, canceling visits at the last minute with flimsy excuses, made me realize with frightening crystal clarity that Regina had tried to machiavellically manipulate not just me individually, but the entire complex family structure, each piece on the chessboard, to get what she obsessively wanted: total control over my children, over me, over everything. Beatrice, I need immediate and clear explanations about this whole madness, he said with his typical arrogance of someone who always believed the world revolved around him, adjusting the Rolex watch on his wrist that cost more than 6 months of child support. I received a disturbing and bizarre call from your mother last night saying you voluntarily agreed to transfer full custody of the children to her because you're going through serious and incapacitating mental problems that make you a danger to the children. But this doesn't make the slightest logical sense considering that, despite our past marital problems and our irreconcilable differences, you have always been indisputably the most dedicated and competent mother I know, sometimes too dedicated to the point of being overprotective and controlling with them. Her unexpected confession revealed even deeper, disturbing, and Machiavellian layers of the criminal scheme, confirming my worst suspicions that Regina had systematically tried to co-opt him into her elaborate fraudulent scheme, promising him significant advantages in the visitation agreement he always complained was too restrictive and a substantial reduction in the child support he considered abusive if he publicly supported her false allegations about my supposed chronic maternal incompetence. She offered me a tempting deal that I admit made me think for a moment, Raphael continued, demonstrating for the first time in years some genuine consideration for my situation and a glimpse of the man I once believed I loved. Said that if I formally testified about your supposed emotional instability, your angry outbursts, your neglect of the children, she would ensure that I would have unrestricted visitation whenever I wanted, wouldn't need to pay full child support and could contribute only symbolically, and she would take care of all the boring part of raising the children while I would be the fun weekend dad. But Beatrice, as much as we have our irreconcilable differences and our marriage was a mistake from the beginning, I know perfectly well that you love these children more than life itself, more than you ever loved me or loved anything, and you would never put them at risk or voluntarily abandon them. Raphael's surprising refusal to participate in my mother's elaborate criminal scheme was an unexpected and welcome relief in an already chaotic and emotionally devastating situation, like finding a small lifeboat amid a shipwreck. But it also revealed the truly disturbing and Machiavellian extent of Regina's meticulously orchestrated plan that had apparently mapped each person in our lives and calculated how to manipulate them. She had systematically contacted not just my ex-husband, with whom she barely spoke since the divorce, but also the children's teachers at both schools who began to look at me with suspicion, close and distant neighbors who whispered when I passed by, work colleagues who stopped conversations when I approached, and even my department head at the university who called me in for an informal chat about my performance, methodically trying to plant poisonous seeds of doubt about my mental capacity, maternal competence, and emotional stability, creating a false but elaborate and consistent narrative that could legally support the fraudulent allegations of the criminally falsified documents when they were discovered, as she knew they eventually would be. Your mother called the school last week, revealed the concerned principal when I frantically called to verify the extent of the damage. Her voice showing genuine concern mixed with embarrassment for having initially believed, saying with great conviction and specific details that she would officially be the children's new legal guardian starting next month due to a court decision, insistently asking to be included as the primary emergency contact and the only one authorized to pick up the children. Going so far as to suggest with tears in her voice that you were hospitalized for intensive psychiatric treatment in a rehabilitation clinic after an alleged violent psychotic break, and that the children were traumatized but being treated by specialists. I confess I almost believed her. She was very convincing, cried in front of me, showed concern that seemed genuine. I only didn't take any action because protocol requires official documentation, but I was considering contacting Child Protective Services. The inevitable and explosive confrontation with my mother happened on a suffocating Saturday afternoon. The air was so heavy and humid it seemed to forecast the emotional storm that was coming, when she showed up unannounced at my house, deliberately ignoring with calculated contempt my explicit instructions transmitted through the lawyer in a registered letter to maintain an absolute distance of at least 100 meters, while the criminal case was being investigated by the competent authorities. Regina arrived with her habitual posture of unquestionable moral superiority, like a queen visiting ungrateful subjects. Impeccably dressed in an expensive beige linen outfit that cost more than I earned in a month, she always made a point of flaunting her comfortable financial situation as proof of superiority, carrying bags of expensive and unnecessary gifts for the children from imported stores in a transparent and pathetic attempt to buy their affection and emotionally manipulate the situation in her favor, as she had always done over the years, undermining my authority with gifts I couldn't afford. "Beatrice, my daughter," she said with that condescending and falsely maternal voice I had known since childhood, that sickeningly sweet voice that had always preceded devastating emotional manipulations and elaborate blackmail. All this unnecessary confusion and exaggerated drama is just a terrible misunderstanding that you're inflating out of pure resentment and ingratitude. I was only trying to help you during an obviously difficult moment in your life, when you clearly weren't in a position to make rational decisions. And you're absurdly overreacting and transforming a genuine gesture of maternal love and legitimate concern into something criminal and sordid, involving lawyers and police as if I were some common criminal and not your mother who gave you life and always wanted what's best for you. Her supernatural and disturbing ability to completely distort objective reality and convincingly present herself as a misunderstood victim and suffering martyr, even when she had committed serious and documented federal crimes, with incontestable evidence of her guilt, was simultaneously impressive in its audacity and absolutely terrifying in its implications about her mental health and disconnection from reality. "Mother," I replied with firmness that surprised me by its intensity and clarity, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed rising from the center of my being, keeping the door partially closed to create a symbolic physical barrier preventing her entry into my family sanctuary. "You criminally forged my signature on official legal court documents, committed perjury by falsely swearing, attempted to steal custody of my innocent children through premeditated federal fraud, and are actively trying to make me appear mentally ill to justify your heinous and unforgivable crimes. This isn't maternal love. It's sick obsession, premeditated criminal behavior, calculated attempt at family destruction that can and should result in years in prison, and I will ensure you pay for every tear my children have shed." My direct and accusatory words, pronounced with a conviction that came from the depths of my wounded maternal soul, finally seemed to penetrate her impenetrable armor of pathological denial and extreme narcissism, because her face underwent a dramatic and frightening transformation, from manufactured maternal condescension practiced for decades to poorly disguised narcissistic fury and pure distilled hatred, finally revealing, like a mask falling after years of theater, the truly controlling, manipulative, and fundamentally cruel nature that had always been present, but that I had wasted decades trying to rationalize, justify, or ignore in the name of a family harmony that never really existed, except in my desperate fantasies of having a normal mother. Regina then revealed her true motivations with a brutal and cruel honesty that left me temporarily breathless, as if all oxygen had been sucked from the atmosphere. "You never knew how to be a proper mother. You've always been a disappointment since you were born," she spat with venom distilling from every carefully pronounced syllable to maximize emotional damage, her green eyes becoming reptilian in their coldness. "Always pathetically weak and overly emotional like your useless father, crying over anything, playing the victim, allowing that worthless and unfaithful Raphael to publicly humiliate you for years, letting the whole town know about his affairs before finally, after everyone already knew about the betrayals and laughed at you behind your back, having the minimal courage to get divorced, and now you're raising my grandchildren, my blood, to be as weak, dependent, and incompetent as you've always been. Each word was calculated with surgical precision to hit my deepest and most secret insecurities, demonstrating decades of careful observation and systematic cataloging of my emotional vulnerabilities for future use as psychological weapons at an opportune moment. I did what I absolutely needed to do to protect these innocent children from growing up under the toxic influence of an incompetent mother who can't even choose a minimally decent man who won't cheat on her with every woman he meets, let alone raise children to be successful and psychologically healthy adults who don't need years of therapy to overcome the traumatic childhood you're providing. She continued, her voice increasing in volume and virulence like a storm gaining strength. Your words definitely and undoubtedly confirmed what I had suspected, but refused to admit during decades of desperate denial and pathetic attempts to win impossible approval. Regina never, at any moment of my existence, truly considered me capable, competent, or worthy of basic respect, always seeing me as a defective and deeply disappointing extension of herself that needed to be obsessively controlled, corrected, and constantly molded through devastating criticism and cruel manipulations to fit her impossible and narcissistic expectations of perfection. The preliminary hearing in family court was strategically scheduled for 2 weeks later, 14 days of pure agony, 330, 6 hours of paralyzing anxiety, a period of anguishing and psychologically torturous waiting, during which I had to heroically continue my normal routine of exhausting work at 2 universities, and dedicated full-time motherhood while dealing with constant paralyzing anxiety about my family's uncertain future. Waking up in panic at 3 a.m, imagining my children being torn from my arms by court officers. Dr. Miranda worked tirelessly during this period, often until 3 or 4 a.m. at his office, surviving on coffee and determination, meticulously gathering irrefutable evidence that proved not only the criminal forgery of documents through detailed professional handwriting analysis by 3 independent experts, but also my impeccable and extensively documented history as an exemplarily dedicated and competent mother. He obtained written and notarized statements from 23 teachers confirming my constant and passionate involvement in the children's education, my presence at all school meetings, my dedicated monitoring of homework. Detailed medical records spanning 7 years showing that I had never missed a single pediatric appointment, always arriving punctually with the children well, dressed and fed, meticulous bank statements from 4 months proving that I always, without exception, prioritized my children's needs over any personal expense, often going without eating to ensure they had the best, and especially 3 independent professional psychological reports confirming my complete mental and emotional stability, despite the extreme stress caused by the traumatic divorce, the devastating maternal betrayal, and the constant threat of losing my children. The intensive preparation for the hearing also involved exhausting but necessary sessions with psychologist Helena, a highly experienced family therapist with 20 years of practice and nationally respected for her work with families in crisis, who was officially appointed by the court to thoroughly evaluate the complex family dynamics and make professional recommendations about the best interests of the vulnerable children. Helena was a 45-year-old woman with a naturally calming and welcoming presence reminiscent of a universal mother, who immediately gained the trust of my suspicious and traumatized children, masterfully getting them to speak openly about their confused feelings and deep fears regarding the chaotic family situation, without traumatizing them with direct or invasive questions about the devastating conflict between myself and Regina. Your children demonstrate a strong, healthy, and secure emotional bond with you, Beatrice, she professionally observed after several intensive observation sessions in different contexts and deep psychological evaluation, adjusting her discreet framed glasses while consulting her detailed 50-page notes. And they clearly feel protected, unconditionally loved, and emotionally nurtured under your dedicated and consistent care. However, I also noticed extremely concerning and consistent signs of systematic emotional manipulation by the grandmother over years, with both children independently and without prompting reporting that she frequently made derogatory comments about you when alone with them, attempting to undermine your maternal authority and plant doubts about your competence, love, and dedication. The disturbing and painful revelations that emerged during the therapeutic sessions with Helena were even more devastating and psychologically damaging than I had imagined in my worst nightmares about family betrayal. Discovering with growing horror and physical nausea that Regina had systematically and methodically tried to undermine my maternal authority for years, through subtle yet constant and venomous comments to the innocent and impressionable children. Gabriel, with his characteristic and painful childlike honesty, revealed in tears that Grandma often said things like, "Mommy doesn't know how to properly take care of you because she's too weak and didn't have a good mother to teach her. It would be much better if you lived permanently with Grandma who knows what's best for intelligent children like you. And Mommy will one day abandon you like your father did, but Grandma will always be here." Deliberately planting toxic seeds of doubt and fear about my maternal competence and commitment in the impressionable and vulnerable minds of my children, who would now need years of therapy to fully overcome. Sophia, despite her young age, demonstrated surprisingly sharp perception and precocious maturity by saying that Grandma gets very angry and makes a scary mean face when we say we love Mommy more than anything in the world, revealing a disturbing and sick pattern of narcissistic competition for the children's affection and attempts at parental alienation that characterized Regina's fundamentally toxic, possessive and narcissistic behavior throughout the children's lives. Lucas, my new partner who had cautiously and respectfully entered my life 6 months after the traumatic divorce, after much reluctance on my part to trust again, became a fundamental and indispensable support during this turbulent and emotionally devastating period that tested the limits of my sanity. At 39, he was a mature, emotionally balanced, and psychologically healthy man who had gone through his own difficult divorce 5 years before and deeply understood the complexity of rebuilding a family life after severe relational trauma and the delicacy needed when entering a wounded family. Lucas remained discreetly but firmly by my side throughout the distressing legal process, never trying to inappropriately interfere in decisions about the children or replace the father figure, but offering constant and unwavering emotional support that helped me maintain my sanity during the darkest and most desperate moments when I contemplated whether it was worth continuing to fight. "Beatriz, you are undisputedly the most dedicated, loving, and competent mother I have ever had the privilege of knowing in my entire life," he said on a particularly difficult night after I received a threatening letter from Regina promising to destroy my pathetic life, when I was immersed in doubts and obsessively questioning if perhaps Regina had some truth about my supposed maternal inadequacies. Holding my trembling hands with infinite gentleness while silent tears ran down my face, leaving trails of pain. And absolutely no one, not even your own mother, especially your mother who clearly has serious untreated psychological problems, has the moral or legal right to question that or try to cruelly take your children away from you. What she's doing is criminal, cruel, sick, and fundamentally wrong on every possible level, and you will overcome this because you are stronger than you imagine. The fateful day of the hearing arrived with a nauseating mixture of paralyzing anxiety that made me vomit 3 times before leaving home, an iron determination that came from love for my children, making me wake up at exactly 4 in the morning after a completely sleepless night, totally unable to go back to sleep while my hyperactive mind obsessively reviewed all the arguments and evidence that would be meticulously presented, imagining every possible scenario from worst to best. The family court was an imposing and intimidating building of modern brutalist architecture from the 70s, all concrete and aggressive angles, with wide, echoing corridors where footsteps sounded like sentences being pronounced, and hearing rooms purposely designed to create an atmosphere of absolute judicial seriousness that intimidated even the most confident and prepared, making everyone feel small before the weight of the law. When I entered the courtroom accompanied by Dr. Miranda, who carried 2 heavy briefcases of documents meticulously organized by date and relevance, I saw Regina sitting rigidly on the other side like an ice statue, dressed in an extremely expensive black suit that looked like anticipatory mourning attire, with her own lawyer. A man too young and visibly uncomfortable who was sweating despite the freezing air conditioning and seemed to be deeply questioning his professional and ethical choices, probably realizing too late that he was defending a cause that was criminally, morally, and legally indefensible that would stain his professional reputation. Judge Fernandez, an imposing 48-year-old woman known in legal circles for her rigorous but scrupulously fair approach to family cases, with no tolerance for manipulations or theatrics, began the hearing with a meticulous and detailed review of the voluminous documents presented by both parties, more than 300 pages of evidence, testimonies, and reports. Her facial expression, initially neutral and professional like a porcelain mask, became visibly serious and concerned, her eyebrows progressively furrowing when she carefully examined the falsified documents, especially when comparing side by side with a professional magnifying glass. The fraudulent signature with multiple examples of my true signature that were clearly and unequivocally different even to a lay observer without any training in handwriting analysis, the differences jumping out like a silent but eloquent alarm cry. "Mrs. Regina Santos," said the judge with a grave and solemn voice that echoed through the silent room like the tolling of funeral bells, removing her reading glasses with deliberately slow and calculated movements to increase the dramatic tension, fixing her penetrating and relentless gaze directly on my mother, who for the first time showed visible discomfort. "Are you fully aware, or should be as a literate and apparently educated citizen, that falsification of judicial documents is a very serious federal crime expressly defined in Article 297 of the Brazilian Penal Code, punishable by imprisonment from 2 to 6 years in an initially closed regime, in addition to substantial fines that can reach hundreds of thousands of reais and permanent loss of civil rights, including the impossibility of holding public office or guardianship of minors. The direct question and explicit and detailed mention of severe criminal consequences, pronounced with the authority of someone who has already convicted many criminals, finally made Regina demonstrate genuine nervousness for the first time since the beginning of the entire conflict. Her carefully maintained composure of decades, beginning to visibly crack under the crushing weight of the legal reality that was finally reaching her like a tsunami wave after the initial earthquake. Regina's pathetic and embarrassing testimony was a revealing and fascinating demonstration of extreme pathological denial and desperate attempts at manipulation that only unequivocally confirmed her guilt to everyone present in the room, including her own lawyer, who seemed to want to disappear. She absurdly claimed with a delusional conviction bordering on insanity that she had signed the documents with express and unequivocal verbal authorization from me during the surgery. A lie so blatantly absurd and impossible considering that I was completely unconscious under deep general anesthesia, intubated and monitored, that even her own lawyer seemed embarrassed to the point of visibly blushing, lowering his head like someone ashamed of being associated with such a farce. When confronted by the judge with this obvious medical impossibility, documented by multiple healthcare professionals, she quickly changed her story like a desperate chameleon, now claiming with equal delusional conviction that I had authorized everything before the surgery in a private, intimate conversation between mother and daughter. But she failed to coherently explain why there was absolutely no written, recorded, or witnessed record of this alleged authorization, why she strategically waited 3 full months to file the documents if she really had my permission, or why she had forged my signature if she had legitimate verbal authorization. "Your daughter was extremely vulnerable, sedated, hospitalized, and unconscious, fighting for her life on an operating table," said Judge Fernandez, with barely contained professional indignation that made her voice tremble slightly with contained anger, her voice progressively increasing in volume and intensity like a forming storm. "And you deliberately, cruelly, and criminally took advantage of this moment of maximum fragility, when she could not defend herself or even be aware of what was happening around her, to try to steal custody of her grandchildren through premeditated documentary fraud that you meticulously planned, waiting for the perfect moment like a predator waiting for the prey to become vulnerable. This demonstrates not only clear, premeditated, and inexcusable criminality, but a profound moral failure that questions your very humanity. A complete absence of basic human empathy that makes me seriously question your character, your psychologically sick motivations, and your fitness to have any kind of unsupervised contact with vulnerable minors whom you clearly see as properties to be conquered, and not human beings with rights of their own." The harsh but absolutely just words of the magistrate, pronounced with the moral authority of someone who dedicated her life to protecting families, finally seemed to make Regina realize the catastrophic and irreversible legal situation she herself had created with her own hands stained with betrayal. But even then, instead of showing genuine remorse or sincere repentance that could have minimally mitigated her situation, she attempted one last, desperate, manipulative emotional ploy that definitively revealed her pathologically narcissistic nature. Regina began to cry theatrically, exaggerated and clearly forced sobs that convinced no one in the room, claiming between obviously fake tears that didn't wet her carefully made up-face that everything had been done out of unconditional and desperate love for my grandchildren who are my blood, my continuation, my legacy, and that she just wanted to protect them from an emotionally unstable, financially incapable, and incompetent mother who doesn't know what's best for them. The dramatic and pathetic performance was so transparently false and manipulative, so obviously rehearsed and artificial that several people in the courtroom, including the clerk and the bailiff, shook their heads in disbelief and visible disgust at the blatant attempt at emotional manipulation. The most powerful, decisive, and emotionally impactful moment of the hearing was when the psychologist Helena presented her comprehensive 80-page professional report on the complete family assessment, describing in precise but accessible technical details, with graphs and development tables, how my children demonstrated healthy emotional development appropriate for their respective ages under my dedicated and consistent care, showing all the markers of loved and cared for children while exhibiting clear, consistent, and concerning signs of post-traumatic stress, emotional confusion, and psychological trauma in relation to the consistently manipulative, possessive, and emotionally abusive behaviors of the grandmother who used them as pawns in her power games. The children expressed repeatedly and consistently, in multiple sessions using different projective and playful techniques, deep love and a sense of absolute security in relation to their mother. Helena testified professionally, consulting her detailed notes, which included children's drawings and transcripts of their words, while demonstrating significant ambivalence, emotional confusion, and even palpable fear regarding displeasing or contradicting their grandmother, strongly suggesting an established pattern of coercive and inappropriate emotional control through emotional blackmail that is causing measurable and potentially lasting psychological damage that will require prolonged therapeutic intervention to be completely overcome. Her meticulous report also included specific, detailed, and inflexible recommendations about the absolute and non-negotiable necessity of constant professional supervision by psychologists trained in dysfunctional family dynamics for any future contact between Regina and the children, emphasizing with scientific data and precedent cases that systematic emotional manipulation, especially coming from authority figures such as grandparents, could cause profound, complex, and potentially permanent psychological damage if not properly controlled, monitored, and therapeutically addressed by specialized professionals. It is my professional recommendation based on 20 years of experience and solid scientific evidence. Helena continued with unwavering authority that came from years of saving families, that any future visitation be conditioned upon the successful completion of at least 2 years of intensive psychological therapy, specifically focused on narcissistic and manipulative behavior patterns, with documented evidence through monthly reports of genuine and sustained behavioral change, plus constant supervision by a qualified professional during all meetings for a minimum period of 1 year after the completion of therapy. Raphael was called as a witness, and, surprisingly to everyone present who knew our troubled and hostile marital history, provided testimony unequivocally favorable to my full and unrestricted custody of the children. An unexpected moment of redemption that made me see a glimpse of the man I once loved. Beatrice has always been an absolutely exemplary mother, dedicated to the point of obsession with the well-being of her children. He told the court with unexpected sincerity that seemed to surprise even himself, nervously adjusting his Italian tie while speaking as if the honest words were difficult to pronounce after years of hostility. Even during our worst moments as a couple, when our marriage was crumbling in flames and we could barely be in the same room without arguing or exchanging accusations, when the hatred was palpable between us, she never, at any time, not even on the darkest days, let our marital problems affect her impeccable and loving care for the children. She always, invariably, placed their well-being above everything else, including above her own emotional and physical well-being, often sacrificing her own needs to ensure they had stability. Regina, on the other hand, Raphael continued, casting a disdainful and genuinely disgusted look in the direction of my mother, who stared at him with barely disguised hatred, has always obsessively tried to interfere in our marriage from day one, as if she were a toxic third element in the relationship, causing constant and unnecessary conflicts with her unsolicited opinions about everything, from how we should raise our children to how to organize our home, cruel judgments about my capabilities as a husband and father, and transparent and pathetic attempts at control through expensive gifts and emotional blackmail. Honestly, and it pains me to admit this, I believe that many of our marital problems were exacerbated, if not caused, by her constant and toxic interference in our lives, creating an environment of permanent tension that made it impossible to build a healthy family. His testimony was particularly impactful and decisive because it came from someone who had absolutely no logical reason or personal interest to favor me, considering our extremely troubled marital history, the legal battles for divorce, and the fact that he could theoretically have benefited substantially by supporting Regina's allegations that promised him significant advantages. Judge Fernandez's decision was clear, forceful, and devastating for Regina in its irrevocable finality. The criminally falsified documents were declared completely null, without any present or future legal validity, and their official destruction was ordered. I fully maintained total and exclusive custody of my children as originally established in the legitimate divorce, and Regina was categorically prohibited through a judicial restraining order from having any unsupervised contact with the children until she satisfactorily completed an intensive 2-year psychological therapy program with monthly reports to the court and demonstrated genuine, profound, and sustained change in her patterns of manipulative, narcissistic, and abusive behavior. Furthermore, the judge announced with gravity that made the silence in the room become even denser and more oppressive, her words falling like hammers of justice. This court is formally referring the complete case with all evidence to the Federal Prosecutor's Office for comprehensive criminal investigation and prosecution for falsification of public documents, use of false documents with the intent to harm third parties, attempted qualified procedural fraud, perjury, and possible criminal conspiracy should any accomplice be identified in the elaboration of the criminal scheme. You, Regina Santos, should prepare to answer criminally for your acts and your choices. Regina's explosive and hysterical reaction to the judicial decision was a shocking and disturbing demonstration of uncontrolled narcissistic rage that completely revealed her truly toxic, violent, and dangerous nature for everyone to see. You will all bitterly regret this. This is a conspiracy, an injustice, she screamed with her face red with rage while being firmly escorted out of the courtroom by 2 court officers who had to hold her by the arms when she tried to violently break free. I am the grandmother of these children, and I have sacred rights that no court can take away. Beatriz has always been an ungrateful, incompetent, and stupid daughter who never recognized or valued everything I sacrificed for her, all the money I spent, all the opportunities I provided. This won't end like this, I swear on my life. You don't know who you're dealing with. Her final words, shouted with pure hatred as she was forcibly removed from the court, with saliva flying from her mouth contorted with rage, definitively confirmed without room for doubt what I had taken decades to accept through layers of denial. My mother saw me not as an independent person with rights, dignity, and autonomy, but as a malfunctioning and rebellious extension of herself that should be obsessively controlled, manipulated, and punished for daring to have her own will to satisfy her insatiable narcissistic needs for power and absolute control. The months following the court decision were dedicated entirely and obsessively to patiently rebuilding, emotional brick by emotional brick, the psychological stability of my fragmented family and helping my traumatized children process with age. Appropriate tools the sudden and permanent absence of their grandmother from their lives. A figure who, despite being toxic, had been a constant presence since their births. With the continuous, dedicated, and compassionate help of psychologist Helena, who became almost part of the family, I implemented careful therapeutic strategies based on scientific evidence to explain the situation in an age-appropriate way without excessively demonizing Regina, as this could make the children question their own identity, but also without minimizing, normalizing, or excusing the severity of what had happened and the danger she represented. Grandma is sick in a special and different way. Not in her body like when we get the flu, but in her feelings and thoughts, like when our mind gets confused. I patiently explained to Sophia when she asked with her sad and confused little eyes why we no longer saw the grandma who always brought presents, and she needs very special help from doctors who specialize in the heart and mind to learn to love in a healthy way that doesn't hurt the people she claims to love. Sometimes love can get sick and confused, and hurt instead of protect. Gabriel, being older, perceptive, and analytical, needed more complex, nuanced, and honest explanations about how sometimes adults make very wrong choices that deeply hurt the people they claim to love, how love can become possessive and destructive, and that establishing firm and even painful boundaries is a crucial form of self-love and family protection necessary for emotional survival. Sometimes, son, I carefully explained choosing each word not to plant seeds of hatred. Loving someone means staying away from that person when they can't love us in a healthy way. It's like when someone has a very serious contagious disease. We stay away not because we don't love, but precisely because we love and don't want the disease to spread to hurt more people. The criminal investigation against Regina advanced methodically through the judicial system with the inevitability of an avalanche, with multiple pieces of evidence being discovered, including records of her having consulted about custody procedures months before my surgery. eventually resulting in serious formal charges of falsification of public documents, qualified procedural fraud, perjury, and attempted parental alienation. Although part of me, that inner child who still yearned for maternal approval, felt a deep and heart-wrenching sadness seeing my mother facing potentially severe criminal consequences that could result in imprisonment, the rational, adult, and protective part knew with absolute certainty that this was necessary not only for abstract justice, but to establish clear, documented, and insurmountable legal boundaries on unacceptable criminal behaviors, creating a precedent that would prevent her from trying something similar in the future. Regina's criminal sentence came almost 2 years after the beginning of the entire conflict, after multiple hearings, appeals, and negotiation attempts. She was sentenced to 2 years of house arrest with electronic monitoring, 3 years of supervised probation with severe restrictions, a permanent restraining order preventing unauthorized contact with me or the children, in addition to being legally required to pay substantial compensation of 100,000 rees for legal costs and moral damages she had caused me, an amount that would consume a good portion of her savings. 3 years have passed since that fateful afternoon when the court officer knocked on my door with falsified documents that almost destroyed my family, and life has followed its inexorable course toward healing. Today, my children are happy, secure, and emotionally well-adjusted children who have overcome the initial trauma with admirable resilience. Gabriel, now 10 years old, is developing a genuine passion for science and astronomy, dreaming of becoming an astrophysicist, demonstrating remarkable emotional maturity for his age. While Sophia at 8 is a natural artist who transforms her feelings into vibrant paintings that decorate our entire house. The absence of drama, manipulation, and toxicity in our lives has created space for genuine joy, healthy growth, and true unconditional love that would never have been possible under the oppressive shadow of Regina's unhealthy control. Lucas and I have carefully built a solid relationship based on rebuilt trust and mutual respect, and he has become a gentle and present father figure for the children, never trying to replace Raphael, but filling emotional gaps with patience and dedication. The house I almost lost is full of genuine laughter, spontaneous hugs, and the peace that comes from knowing we are safe, loved, and free from manipulation. Sometimes in the quiet early hours when the world sleeps, I still think about Regina, not with anger or resentment, but with a distant sadness for what could have been if she had been capable of healthy love. But these reflections no longer imprison me. They are merely echoes of a storm that has passed, reminders of our strength and survival. Did you like Beatrice's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.